people are an essential component to growth, and without them, our economies will stutter. That's why South Dakota, this state of less than 1 million people, has really put people first in its strategy for growth.
In my former position as Deputy Commissioner at the Governor's Office of Economic Development, our primary objective was to recruit businesses to the state, have the existing businesses expand. One of the cool things about South Dakota is that everybody knows everybody. A friend of mine says that if you say something bad, your mom's gonna know pretty quick. But at the same time, you know where people are from based on their last names, right? We still have this ability to connect people and places with very little information in our state. We've seen a lot of bold leadership in South Dakota over the last 5 years from our elected officials and from our business community. They think big. They find ways to create solutions.
If there was one message that you would want to deliver to a family or perhaps a budding entrepreneur who's considering relocating to South Dakota, what would it be?
Yeah, a lot of good things to hit on there, Bradley. Well, first,
imagine being in a state where jobs aren't the problem, but people are. I'm Bradley Sherman, and this is Population Next. Today, we're turning our attention to the state of South Dakota, a state with a population roughly 30% larger than Washington, D.C., yet covering a significant landmass. This state has high aspirations, yet it has one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country and one of the highest performing economies, which presents some new challenges for how you recruit and retain people to move there and to stay. I'm joined today by Jesse Fonkert. He's an expert in export policy for the state. In fact, he was just recently appointed to run the South Dakota Trade Council. Jesse is a veteran of Washington, D.C. He served on the Governor's Economic Development Conference, and he's going to provide us with some real insights about where the future is going for a state where the problem isn't jobs, it's people. Jesse, welcome to Population Next.
thank you. Appreciate being here.
Jesse, South Dakota is really an impressive state. I had the opportunity of visiting there earlier this year at the invitation of the governor, and I was taken by its low unemployment, its business-friendly policies, and its booming ag sector. But it's also facing a major constraint right now, and that's its population, the fact that it doesn't necessarily have enough people to fill the jobs available. How do you square that paradox?
Wow, I feel like we could take a full day seminar to talk about what you just said. And, our state historically has had a low unemployment rate, right? Anywhere from 1.8%, which we have today, to the mid twos to the threes. And if you look back at the frontier days of the Homestead Act, right? U.S., our state leaders have been trying to find ways to get people to settle the upper Great Plains, right? So let's fast forward to 2025. And, our workforce right now is roughly 490,000 people strong. Of the 490,000 people, 483 of them have jobs, right? 483,000 people have jobs. So roughly that means we have a 1.9% unemployment rate across the entire state. So that's a challenge, right? So in my former position as Deputy Commissioner at the Governor's Office of Economic Development, our primary objective was to recruit businesses to the state, have the existing businesses expand, right? And we look at we look at this mix. We talk about capital markets. We talk about cost of goods. We talk about the supply chain. But the one item that most folks want to talk about first is, where is the workforce? And I live in the Sioux Falls Metro, the largest metro in the state of South Dakota. I live in a small town of about 3,000 people, about 20 minutes from downtown Sioux Falls. And our metro area, for example, they add between 6,000 to 10,000 people every year. But the unemployment rate doesn't change, meaning we are adding jobs and filling them at the same rate for the most part. And this is a good problem to have, right? There are states out there, there are metros out there where the jobs aren't being filled, or where the population is not growing, either organically or through folks moving in. And what we found in our state is that people want what we call freedom. And former Governor Noem was huge advocate about talking about our freedoms. And our current governor, Governor Roden, he talks about keeping South Dakota strong, safe, and free. And in the last year, there was a workforce attraction initiative called Freedom Works Here that spoke to people from across the country that were looking for a state that they could call home, they can build their business, they can support their family, and they can afford to live, actually. And we have all those things in South Dakota, from the rural parts of the state to the frontier parts of the state where you won't see another person for 50 to 100 miles. I grew up close to that area in north central South Dakota, to the beautiful Black Hills of South Dakota, which is home to Rapid City and Ellsworth Air Force Base. So our state's been addressing these things. Part of the economic development initiative or objective as well is to raise wages, right? By recruiting more businesses to come into your state, by helping existing businesses to grow. The idea is that competition creates higher wages. And so the winners at the end of the day are the folks that call this state home. And we've seen that working very well.
Right, but there's still some barriers that exist here, and I'm interested specifically in two that were surfaced when I was there: issues around caregiving for children, and these are in housing, of course, because there seems to be a limited supply, at least for now. How are you seeing the state writ large, but more importantly, the local communities responding to this demand for more caregiving and more housing? Because I understand women have an incredibly high employment rate in South Dakota.
Yeah, a lot of good things to hit on there, Bradley. Well, first, if we look at South Dakota as a whole, we have one of the highest rates of both spouses working outside of the home. Now, there's a few ways to interpret that. The first way to interpret is that folks in South Dakota want to work, but they also want to have families, right? If we look at the stats, we have one of the highest replacement rates in the nation. We're right about 2. I think full replacement's about 2.1. So we're not quite where we need to be, but we're in a better spot than many other states. And so we have folks that want to work, they want to raise a family, and they've found ways to do both. Now, we look at the issue when it comes to childcare. We do have one of the lowest rates of childcare costs in the country. Now, that's a good thing and a bad thing. The good side is that if you aren't able to afford childcare in South Dakota, it's a lower cost, and so your dollar goes a little bit further. Second issue, though, or the first issue that's when we look at that, is that when costs are low, we have maybe a market issue, right? Where if costs were higher, it might drive more folks to come in to the childcare space to help innovate, to provide more opportunities for people, and to grow that sector. Now, the dichotomy of that, though, is that if that happens and rates go up, you might see people, right, both husbands or wives or parents, dropping out of the workforce instead. And so it's this balancing act. Now, in South Dakota, the state does not put a ton of money to childcare, right? We have a firm belief that it is responsibility of the family to figure these things out. Now, the economic development community in our state has been very vocal about trying to find creative ways to create public-private partnerships across the state between employers, between governments from the municipal level to the county level to the state level, to help make dollars go a little bit further so that we can have more childcare access where those wages might go up a little bit and where the market might expand. Now, again, it's a very fine balance on these things, but it's important for us to be able to attract that workforce, retain that workforce, and keep things going at the right clip. So it's been a great conversation. You heard about that during your visit to South Dakota, the childcare challenge that we're having. And that's a national challenge, right? We look across states from the coast to the upper Great Plains and the Midwest. Of course, the pricing's a little bit different.
Just a little.
We know that this is an issue we need to solve. Now, South Dakota as well, we don't have state-funded preschool. And that is a constant conversation that is had between the legislature and the folks in the business community. The challenge, though, in our state, we don't have an income tax, right? We can't just raise taxes, because in our Constitution, it says that we are very fiscally prudent about how we spend the taxpayers' dollars. So most of our government is funded by sales tax, very broad sales tax, which is why the tourist economy is so important to our state, because it brings a lot of money into our coffers. Now, you mentioned housing. Let's talk about housing. both good things and bad things, right? So right now, building a house can be very challenging given the interest rate environment that we're in, where costs are for goods as part of the supply chain, and the increases that happened in the last 5 years. So folks that are trying to get into a house that might be my age in their lower 30s or mid 30s, somewhat challenging. I think I read a stat yesterday in the Journal or the Economist that I think this is the all-time at this point. I think the average age of a first-time homeowner is the highest it's ever been, or something similar to that. It's like
It is
37 or 38.
you are correct. It is 38 now.
That's an issue. I was lucky to be able to get into a house when I turned 28, and I can't imagine if I hadn't been able to get into the opportunity then versus now. So our state has found creative ways to again partner with the private sector to create more housing opportunities across the state. So under Governor Noem, in partnership with the legislature, they appropriated $200 million to the South Dakota Housing Development Authority. Half of that would go towards grants on housing infrastructure. It'll have to go towards loans on housing infrastructure. And the idea on this grant program is that a third of that came from the state, and you need to find a 2/3 match, right? So the idea was that by investing $200 million, they wanted to capitalize on resources from the private sector, along with local governments, to come up with another $400 million. So at the end of this program, at the end of this grant opportunity, there'd be a $600 million investment into housing infrastructure on the infrastructure standpoint, meaning roads, land preparation, utility work, kind of the upfront cost to get housing going. We also have a challenge right now when we look at the older generation that's looking to either downsize or right size or get out of a house completely. Their opportunities are somewhat limited based on where pricing is at. So, for example, if you bought a house, let's say 40 years ago for X dollars, of course, that house is appreciated. But if you need to move away from your farmhouse or your house that has stairs in it to a new construction that's, say, zero entry that you can age in place. We know aging in place is so important. Guess what? There's a price disparity on that. Even though your house is appreciated significantly over that time period, the cost of getting into a house that's smaller but more accessible is higher, right? A new construction is higher. And so we have, I would say, consensus in the community, the economic development community especially, about the importance of addressing this issue and finding ways to work with the private sector and the state to invest the right resources to solve this long term. But this issue is not going away, especially given where interest rates are at. I think I checked the mortgage rate this morning for the 30-year. I think we're at 6.85%. I locked in 2020, and I'm ready to look at my next house as my family is growing. But tell you what, that'd be a huge step backwards if I wanted to keep the same exact price point. And this is a challenge that's not going away that we need to continue to find ways to address.
Yeah, I think we're all feeling that right now. All of us who are looking for that next home, or many of us for our first home, is how do we get to that given the barriers that are in place? Jesse, speak to me a little bit about the culture of South Dakota, because I think that is part of what makes your approach to putting people first really unique, especially as it relates to growing your economy. What is the state's goal aligned with its culture for attracting people from other parts of the U.S.?
Well, we live in a great country. We live in a diverse country, both topography, geographically, culturally, amazing, right? So I had the opportunity after college, which I went to college here in South Dakota, to move to D.C. for a couple of years with my then girlfriend, now wife. And we enjoyed the experience, the culture, the energy, the history of the East Coast is incredibly attractive and appealing. At the end of the day, when we look at where we want to be with our own lives and with our future kids, current kids' lives, South Dakota was the answer. And part of that is, to your point, is the culture of our state, which goes back to this nostalgia. I think of a Norman Rockwell painting where you still have the diner, you still have the kid and the grandpa or the neighbor spending time together. You still have this concept that it takes a village to raise a child, where from small towns to big cities like Sioux Falls, which is again our largest city, that concept still emanates, right? So I'd moved to South Dakota when I was 6 years old in 1998. My father was a retired pastor, was doing some work in the East Coast where my mother is from. And when we moved back to the state, you find that, one, it's very welcoming, right? It brings folks in. But two, the families that call this state home, many have been here since the 19th century. I was hearing a story of a new official that's working in the state government. His family are fifth generation farmers of land outside of Sioux Falls. They've been there for 135 years.
Wow.
And that's a relatively short time period when we look at the history of the country and Western culture. But this pride is visible when this gentleman speaks, when other folks speak about where their families are from, the connections that they have, and the state as a whole. Now, one of the cool things about South Dakota is that everybody knows everybody. And we're about 1 degree of separation from each other, literally. And that has both pros and cons. The con is you can't get away with much because everybody talks. A friend of mine says that if you say something bad, your mom's going to know pretty quick. But at the same time, you know where people are from based on their last names, right? We still have this ability to connect people and places with very little information in our state. Now, you might ask, how does that translate then to attracting people to South Dakota that have no connection to our state? Well, first, we're always trying to find ways to get folks to come back to South Dakota, right? We call it Dakota roots, finding folks to come back to the roots in our state, where they, like me, might have left for a couple of years to explore something new and to find themselves. But we want them to come back and still call our state home because we know there's an opportunity for them. I think folks, especially right now in their 30s and lower 40s, that are either starting families or having their families grow, that's happening. That's happening right now. That's a trend. We can see that. But second, our economic development community has been focused on trying to find ways to tell the story to other folks, the story of what success means of welcoming somebody into your town. There's a town called Mitchell that I think you've written about before that have what they call the concierge program. And they've taken the Chamber of Commerce welcome wagon concept, they put it on steroids. Where when I ran a small chamber in Hartford, where I still live, we would have a list of all the new water bill accounts that were created. We'd go to their house, we'd give them a welcome bag, give them a handshake and say, hey, shop local, thanks for being here. And that was it. But now we have folks like Mitchell that are innovating, that are finding ways to either give a financial stipend to folks that choose their home to make that cost a little bit lower of moving. But then two, this concierge program is able to help new residents in that town by connecting them with resources, with other new people, with future friends, with an understanding of the culture of that town, so that these people stay in that community long term. They make this community their own. Then also that the culture, the fabric of that community doesn't change too much, right? And we can all agree that change can be good, right? Adaptation is good and is important. And one of the great things I think with the last 5 years and our initiatives to have more folks call South Dakota home is that people are bringing with them new ideas and new ways of doing things and helping people to grow and advance both economically, but also culturally. But that's also a two-way street. And I can't wait to look back at this period, maybe 15 or 20 years, and see how things have adapted and grown due to the influx of new people with new ideas and new concepts coming into our communities.
And I assume when you moved to Washington, you did not get a welcome basket or a concierge program to get you integrated into the community.
I think I slept on a friend's floor for 2 weeks while I was looking for an apartment. And I think I got a cockroach. I think that was my welcome. But you know what? That's a learning lesson too.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously different places have different people challenges that they're trying to manage. Of course, here in Washington, we've had challenges with overgrowth for the past decade or so. The one question that I know is a bit of a hot topic, so I just want to kind of talk around it maybe, is given the need for people, there's obviously a domestic recruitment effort to get people to move to South Dakota. But South Dakota obviously relies on some either immigrant labor from overseas, or perhaps some seasonal labor for the agricultural products. How is that being plugged into the overall strategy for the state?
Now, that's a great question. And, in my position at GED, we didn't have as much engagement with some of these items as other departments like the labor department would have. But we heard from the business community, right? And many of the businesses, especially in the tourism sector, were always curious for the status of some of these visa-related programs. And again, that can be a challenging conversation depending on where you stand on certain issues, right? Some folks think that, having even temporary visa program folks come over creates a wage imbalance between folks that are already there and new folks. I won't speak to that as much. I can only speak to what folks need, which is people. And, when it comes to a low unemployment rate of being close to 1.8%, what we found is that the answer has been innovation, right? And it's tapping into some of these resources and some of these programs. This is not a South Dakota story, but there's this community called Worthington that's in Minnesota. And the town has changed quite a bit since its early founding as, kind of a Scandinavian German community, to being one that's very rich culturally, with folks from very different backgrounds than would be a typical Minnesotan. And there's a story that was written about this community. There's an author whose name escapes me. He wrote this book, The Things We Carry. Gosh, I need to think about this. But it talks about how things have changed since he was in this community. He's a rich writer, great storyteller. And the town like that is very important. That's an hour from Sioux Falls. Now, we look inside the state, we look at a town called Huron, which is in eastern South Dakota, centrally located. It's not on an interstate. It's not on a major river. Population has been strong, but has seen a lot of growth. But a lot of manufacturing there, a lot of food processing too. And so what this community has done, and the superintendent of this community, who's now retired, they found ways to welcome different populations. And I believe that the group of folks that call Huron home, these new Americans, I think they're Karen is the name of the group. And the school has found ways to help welcome them in the community, assimilate them into the community, but also educate the community on how to work with this population too, and how to make them feel like home. Now, a lot of these folks that come here because they're either refugees from a crisis back in their home community or looking for new opportunity, so they come with nothing. So every year, a friend of mine hosts a pheasant hunt in the Huron area. And we go out and we find these birds. We harvest these birds, which is our state bird. We're the only state in the union that I'm aware of that shoots its state bird, the Chinese ringneck pheasant. Great bird, good food. But when we donate these birds to this population, to these people, and the appreciation for this relatively small token is really heartwarming. But our state, to the innovation point, I like to think with the manufacturing sector especially, has found ways to really create solutions for this workforce challenge. And the innovation that we've seen is in automation. And this is a buzzword right now. Everybody's talking about automation, from AI to large language models to everything else happening. But there's been a call right now to bring more manufacturing back to the country. And I'd like to see what happens in the next few years. We're always optimistic in South Dakota, and we will try to find ways to be part of solutions. But our state's already leading the way when it comes to innovation and automation. When you have an inability to maybe fill a position right now, you find ways to make the position more efficient, right? Which means that you are using your capital better, you're using your space better, you're operating leaner, which makes you even stronger. And so when we look at recessions that happen over the last 20 years, South Dakota has typically seen less of a dip than other states and then nationally as a whole. Meaning our businesses are mostly insulated from recessionary pressures, right? The way that they operate means that they are well set up for when challenges happen. That kind of goes back to our pioneer mentality that we talked about a little bit earlier, is that since we've been here in the 19th century, we've had to find ways to weather the storm. And that's by working together with other people and being prepared for emergencies when they happen, because they will happen.
So Jesse, let's pivot to what you're doing now, because people are important in terms of growing the economy, both within the state, but also outside of the state, and of course the United States. You're a relatively small statewide market with about 1 million people or so. So
Yep.
obviously, external markets are a key component for growth. How are you and South Dakota Trade helping South Dakota producers, both in the agricultural sector and the industrial sector, and in tech too, because tech does exist in South Dakota as well, export their goods, find these new markets that are outside of the United States?
Well, my background historically has been all in economic development, right? And that's infrastructure, manufacturing, job creation, capital X, these things that we judge ourselves based on that help grow our economies and our communities. We've been very good at that to the point where we have more businesses and not enough people to fill the jobs that have come in. We've done a great job as a state of attracting businesses and helping retain business in our state. One thing that we've done, maybe not as good on, is selling ourselves on the international stage. We look at the stats, South Dakota ranks in the bottom 4 states of exporting non-ag goods, right? We're number 47. To me, that's an opportunity, right? That means that we have a lot of work to do. And so Governor Noem saw that. The business community saw that. And in 2023, South Dakota Trade, a public-private partnership, was created to help businesses in South Dakota navigate international trade. And so I'm taking this position. I'm relatively new to the international trade world. Of course, my background is in international affairs and business administration, and so it seems like a natural fit. But what we do at South Dakota Trade is incredibly important. Before I get into that, I just want to touch on one more stat, and that is when it comes to non-manufacturing goods, ag products, we're in the top 15 states that are exporting to markets like Canada, Mexico, China, Japan, and the Netherlands, which I'm still digging into the data on that one as a Dutchman. I really appreciate that. But what we're doing as far as helping increase these numbers and grow these numbers, one is telling the story, the importance of international trade and exploring international markets, right? You mentioned that our market is relatively small, less than 1 million people. Right? The U.S. of A, we're what, 330 million-ish, 350 million? Well, there's what, 7 billion, soon to be 8 billion people in the world?
8 billion and counting.
8 billion and counting. I need to brush up on my World Encyclopedia. Well, what does that tell you? It tells you there's a lot of untapped potential out there, especially look at parts of Southeast and Northeast Asia, parts of Africa, parts of the EU, and of course, South America in our own hemisphere. And so our organization, which is 2 years old, has already led 5 trade missions. We've had trade missions, first one to Mexico, which we see as an incredibly important trading partner for South Dakota. And especially when it comes to our commodities and our crops that are grown in our state. We've gone to South Africa. We've been to Japan and Taiwan together, been to Israel. And then again, we just returned from Mexico recently. We're also planning another trade mission to Israel here shortly, along with ones to Ireland, the UK, and Canada later this year. And so trade missions are a incredibly important part of what we do. But first is helping small, medium enterprises understand the market opportunities that are available to them if they want to engage in the system, and helping them navigate that system, which might be somewhat complex, but once you learn a little bit about it, very easy to understand.
Right. So Jesse, I want to get a sense of the South Dakota experience is relatively unique, but you're not the only state that has a relatively small population. If there were 3 things that you would say other states of comparable size should learn from South Dakota's playbook, what would they be?
Oh, 3 lessons from our playbook. I don't want to share a playbook, Bradley. This is
just the top line. Just the top line. Just the top line.
Well, first, I think one, it's about creating strong partnerships. And as I had to joke with some people about certain buzzwords that we use in economic development and in association management. Partnerships is one of those words, but it's true, right? In South Dakota, since we have a viewpoint of limited taxation and fiscal prudence, it means that if we want to do certain things, we need to maximize our dollars. And to do that, we take state funds, we find the private sector interest, or I would say market interest, an idea or a concept, we marry them together to create an outcome that is great for our people, that sees investment, and that can pay for itself long term. And so the first thing I would say is create strong public-private partnerships. Two, I think, is fiscal prudence. We talk about South Dakota's unique selling proposition. We talk about, one, our people and how great our people are when it comes to working and their efficiency and their problem-solving skills. But I think that at the end of the day, you really got to find ways to ensure that that problems are being solved and being done in a very prudent manner. We do that with no income tax, right? We do that with very little money from the public sector to do things. And other states are following that example right now. If you look at states in the Midwest, the income tax rates are falling, which is challenging for us because our unique selling proposition, we want them to be behind other states. I jest, but I think states are seeing that this model works incredibly well. And then the third thing from our playbook, be bold. Be bold. We've seen a lot of bold leadership in South Dakota over the last 5 years from our elected officials and from our business community. They think big. They find ways to create solutions. And I and my family and my neighbors and folks across the state are the ones that get to benefit from that. And so being bold might be different to some people, but it's to think big, dream big, ask the right questions, and don't take no for an answer.
And Jesse, I'd like to end with just a kind of a broad question for you, being that you're somebody who did leave and come back. If there was one message that you would want to deliver to a family or perhaps a budding entrepreneur who's considering relocating to South Dakota, what would it be?
You can always leave, which means you can always come back. And we came back. In South Dakota, you can go anywhere, right? I travel the world from Sioux Falls. You can travel the world from Rapid City. If there's a fear of not being able to see other things, it's just unfounded. We have great airport access across the state. But two, if you want to really succeed, it takes a community. It takes partners. It takes folks that want to help you. And in some parts of the world, some people view partnerships as a zero-sum game, right? They don't understand that everybody can win together. In South Dakota, your neighbors do have your best interest in mind. They do want to work with you. They do want to find solutions to your problems, and they want to see you succeed and grow. Other parts of the world and in the country, unfortunately, folks don't always feel that way, right? There's not this sense of neighborliness or community that makes us so strong here in South Dakota. And while I might get an itch once in a while for a big city, I know that when it comes to raising a family and the value set we have here in South Dakota and the protection that my kids have, thanks to the way their neighbors look at them, the way that the folks across their community looks out for them, I wouldn't trade that for the world.
Well, this is fantastic. Jesse, thank you so much for joining me today on Population Next. I hope to have you back soon.
Me too. Thank you.
Jesse reminds us that people are an essential component to growth. And without them, our economies will stutter, if not stop and reverse entirely. That's why South Dakota, this state of less than 1 million people, has really put people first in its strategy for growth, both in terms of building up its statewide capacity, as well as its export markets worldwide. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, or subscribe. And if you want to dive deeper into the future of demographics and learn more about Population Next, please visit us at populationnext.com.